A cowboy claimed the bride no one wanted, and she transformed his harsh frontier life forever. The town sat on the edge of the open land, where the road ended and the wild began. It was not a place people chose for comfort. It was a place they came to because they had no other choice. Wooden buildings leaned slightly with age, their paint faded by sun and wind. Dust lived everywhere, on boots, on windowsills, and in the air itself. Life moved slowly here, but hardship moved fast. She had lived in this town for nearly 2 years, though it still felt like she did not belong. People knew her name, but they rarely used it. Instead, they spoke about her in low voices as if she were a warning. The woman no one wanted, the bride who had been left behind. She was not loud, she was not bold. She did not laugh often or draw attention when she entered a room. Her beauty was quiet, the kind that required time and care to notice. But time was something the frontier rarely offered, and care was in short supply. In a place where survival mattered more than kindness, first impressions lasted forever. Her trouble had started with a promise that never became real. A man from a nearby settlement had shown interest in her. There were talks, plans, and hopeful looks exchanged in daylight. But when the time came to commit, he disappeared. Some said he found someone younger. Others said he could not afford another mouth to feed. No one knew the truth, but the result was the same. He never returned, and the whispers began. On the frontier, a woman alone was seen as a burden. People believed she must be weak, unlucky, or flawed in some way. No one asked what she had lost or how deeply it hurt. They only saw the outcome and judged her by it. She lived in a small room behind a family's home, helping where she could. She cooked, cleaned, mended clothes, and watched children. In return, she was given a roof and food. It was not a bad arrangement, but it was not a future either. Each day looked like the one before, and each night ended with the same heavy silence. She often stood near the window at dusk, watching the sky change colors over the open land. The horizon stretched so wide it made her feel small, yet it also reminded her that life might still hold something more. She did not dream of romance the way she once had. Those dreams had been worn down by reality. Now she only hoped for dignity, safety, and a place where she mattered. In this town, marriages were not built on love. They were built on need. Men needed help. Women needed protection. Feelings were something people hoped might come later if they came at all. Many women were chosen quickly, sometimes within days of arrival. She watched them leave town with their new husbands, riding off toward unknown futures. She smiled politely and wished them well, then returned to her chores with a tight feeling in her chest. The gathering was announced one Sunday morning after church. It was meant to be simple. A small meeting where unmarried men could meet women who were willing to start new lives beyond the town. No promises, no pressure. At least that was what the preacher said. Everyone knew what it truly was, a final chance. She almost did not attend. The thought of standing in a room while men looked past her filled her with dread, but the family she stayed with encouraged her to go. They meant well. They believed this was her best hope. And deep down, she knew they were right. That afternoon, she dressed carefully. Her clothes were plain but clean. She braided her hair neatly and washed her face until it felt tight from the cold water. She looked at her reflection in a small mirror and tried to see what others might see. She did not see beauty or failure, only a woman tired of waiting. The room where the gathering was held smelled of wood and old oil lamps. Sunlight filtered through small windows, casting long shadows on the floor. Several women stood or sat quietly, their hands folded, their eyes alert. Some looked nervous. Others looked confident, already sure of their outcome. Men entered in pairs or alone. Some were young and hopeful. Others were older, their faces marked by years of work and weather. They spoke in low voices, glancing around the room, measuring futures in a matter of moments. She stood near the back as she always did. She did not push forward or try to catch anyone's eye. Experience had taught her that hope could be painful when it went unanswered. One by one, women were approached. Soft conversations began. Names were exchanged. Promises, though cautious, were hinted at. She watched as the space around her slowly emptied. Each time a man passed her without stopping, the room seemed to grow quieter, though she knew it was only inside her own chest. She kept her expression calm. She had practiced this. She had learned how to appear unaffected, even when disappointment pressed down hard. Still, each passing moment felt heavier than the last. That was when the door opened again. The cowboy entered without ceremony. He did not look like the others. His clothes were worn but well cared for. Dust clung to his boots and his hat showed signs of long travel. He stood tall but not proudly. His posture spoke of habit, not display. This was a man used to being alone. Some in the room recognized him at once. He came into town only when necessary. He lived far beyond the settled land where help was scarce and mistakes could cost lives. People respected him, but they did not know him. He kept his distance and they let him. His eyes moved across the room, steady and observant. He did not rush. He did not smile. When his gaze passed over her, she expected it to continue on as all the others had. But it stopped. She felt it before she saw it. That strange sense of being noticed after a long time of being invisible. She lifted her eyes slowly, unsure of what she would find. He did not look at her with pity. He did not look at her with judgment. His expression was thoughtful, almost cautious, as if he were considering something important. The room seemed to hold its breath. He took a step forward, then another. People whispered, confused by his choice. He stopped in front of her and spoke in a calm, even voice. He said her name. The sound of it startled her. It had been so long since anyone had spoken it with intention. She answered softly, afraid her voice might shake. There were no grand words, no promises of ease or comfort. He spoke plainly. He said he needed a wife who was willing to work hard, to face isolation, and to build a life that would not be easy. He said he could offer honesty, safety, and a shared future, nothing more and nothing less. The room waited for her response. In that moment she felt the weight of every look upon her. Some were shocked, some were doubtful. A few were quietly relieved, as if a problem were finally being solved. She did not feel excitement. She did not feel fear. What she felt was something quieter and stronger, a sense that this choice, though sudden, was real. She nodded. That single motion changed everything. As they left the room together, the sunlight outside felt brighter, though nothing had truly changed yet. The town they walked through was the same dusty place it had always been, but for the first time in a long while, she was not walking alone. Neither of them knew what waited beyond the edge of town. Neither could guess how deeply this decision would shape their lives. All they knew was that something had begun, something born not of hope or romance, but of courage, need, and a quiet willingness to try. They did not leave town right away. After the gathering, there were things that had to be settled, words that had to be spoken, and quiet goodbyes that felt heavier than expected. The town that had once made her feel small now watched her with new interest. Some people looked surprised, others looked doubtful. A few looked almost embarrassed, as if they had misjudged her and did not know how to correct themselves. She stayed in her small room that night, packing what little she owned. A spare dress, a shawl worn thin at the edges, a few personal items that held memories she could not leave behind. As she folded each piece carefully, she felt a strange mix of emotions. There was fear, yes, but also a calm she had not known in a long time. For once, something was happening. Her life was moving instead of standing still. The cowboy stayed in town overnight as well. He slept in the stable loft, as he often did when he came through. He did not visit her room or try to speak to her privately. He believed in giving space, and she was grateful for that. His silence felt respectful, not distant. The next morning the sky was pale and wide, stretching endlessly over the land. A wagon stood ready at the edge of town, filled with supplies. He had prepared carefully, thinking ahead as he always did. Tools, sacks of grain, blankets, and water skins were secured tightly. Everything had its place. When she came out carrying her small bundle, he noticed how light it was. He did not comment, but something passed through his eyes, perhaps surprise, perhaps understanding. They spoke little as they set off. The road out of town was familiar to him, but new to her. With every step forward, the sounds of the settlement faded. The voices, the doors, the church bell, all grew distant until there was only wind and the steady movement of the wagon. She looked back once. The town stood quietly behind her, unchanged. She felt no pull to return. The journey took days. During daylight, the land stretched endlessly, broken only by low hills and patches of grass that moved like waves. At night, the sky opened wide with stars so bright it felt unreal. She had never seen so many at once. They sat by a small fire, eating simple meals. He spoke only when necessary, but when he did, his voice was calm and steady. He explained the land, the weather, and what to expect ahead. She listened closely. She asked questions when she needed to, careful not to ask too many. She sensed he was a man who valued thought over noise. Silence did not make him uncomfortable, and slowly it stopped making her uncomfortable too. By the second day, she noticed small things about him. He always checked the horses before resting. He walked the land as if listening to it. When the wind shifted, he adjusted their path without explanation. This was not pride, it was survival learned over time. He noticed things about her as well. She never complained, even when the ride was rough or the sun burned her skin. She offered help without being asked. When she fell asleep by the fire, she did so lightly, waking at unfamiliar sounds, alert despite exhaustion. She was stronger than she looked, and he respected that. On the fourth day, they reached his land. The homestead stood alone, surrounded by open space in every direction. The house was small but solid, built with care rather than comfort in mind. A stable stood nearby, weathered but sturdy. Everything bore signs of hard work and little rest. She stood quietly, taking it in. This was to be her home. There were no neighbors close enough to call for help. No town nearby, only land, sky, and responsibility. He watched her closely, waiting for fear or regret to show itself. But she only nodded slowly, as if accepting a truth she had already prepared for. Inside the house, the air smelled of wood and earth. The rooms were simple: a table, 2 chairs, a bed, shelves lined with tools and supplies. There were no decorations, no signs of warmth beyond what was necessary. She placed her bundle down carefully. "I can make it better," she said softly, not as a promise but as a statement of intention. He did not reply right away. He simply nodded. The days that followed were difficult. Frontier life did not pause for adjustment. There was work every hour, and mistakes could not be undone easily. She learned quickly how to cook over a fire, how to conserve water, how to move carefully in the open land. Her hands grew sore. Her muscles ached. At night, she fell asleep before her head touched the pillow. At times, loneliness pressed in hard. The silence here was deeper than in town. It was not filled with people or noise. It was filled with space, and space had a way of forcing thoughts to surface. He struggled too, though he did not show it openly. Sharing space after years of solitude was not easy. He had grown used to doing everything alone. Now he had to slow down, explain, and consider someone else's needs alongside his own. There were moments of tension. Small misunderstandings that felt larger because there was nowhere to escape them. Once, she rearranged supplies in a way that made sense to her but confused him. His voice rose in frustration before he caught himself. She went quiet, not angry, just wounded. That night he sat outside longer than usual, staring into the darkness. He realized then that survival alone had taught him many things, but not how to live with another person. The next morning he apologized. The word did not come easily, but he said it plainly. She accepted it just as plainly. No long discussion followed. They moved forward. Slowly, routines formed. She found ways to bring order into the house. Clean surfaces. Simple touches that made the space feel lived in rather than endured. He noticed the change more than he expected. The house felt less heavy when he entered it at the end of the day. She began to understand the land, which paths were safe, which sounds meant nothing and which required attention. He taught her without speaking much, showing instead. She learned by watching, by doing, by failing and trying again. Trust grew quietly between them, not the kind that demanded words, but the kind built through shared effort. When a storm came suddenly, they worked together without hesitation. When supplies ran low, they planned carefully instead of panicking. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the land in gold, they sat outside, exhausted but steady. She looked at him then, not as a stranger who had chosen her out of necessity, but as a man shaped by loss and endurance. "I know this isn't easy," she said. He nodded. "Nothing here ever is." She smiled faintly. "That's all right." For the first time, he smiled too. Neither of them spoke of the future in grand terms. There were no promises beyond the next day, the next task, the next season. But in that quiet understanding, something solid began to take root. This life was harsh. The land was unforgiving. But for the first time, neither of them was facing it alone. The seasons began to turn, and with them, life settled into a rhythm that was both demanding and steady. Days were measured by light and weather rather than clocks. Morning came early, often before the sun rose fully, and work began as soon as eyes opened. There was no room for delay. The land required attention every day, and neglect showed itself quickly. She learned to rise with purpose. At first her body resisted, stiff and tired from the day before. But slowly strength came. Her movements grew sure. Tasks that once felt overwhelming became part of her hands and memory. She learned how to prepare meals that stretched supplies without wasting them. She learned how to mend, how to clean tools properly, and how to read the sky for signs of change. The house began to feel different, not larger but warmer. She added small things that cost nothing but effort: a cloth over the table, tools arranged so they could be found easily. The bed made neatly each morning. These were small acts, but they changed the space. The house no longer felt like a place meant only to survive in. It began to feel like a place where life could happen. He noticed these changes more than he expected. He had lived alone so long that he had stopped seeing his surroundings. Now, when he came in from work, the quiet inside the house felt different. Not empty, but calm. He did not comment often, but his steps slowed when he entered, as if he did not want to disturb what she had created. Work outside remained hard. The land tested them both. Some days were kind, with soft wind and open sky. Other days brought heat that pressed down heavy, or cold that cut through clothing. They worked side by side when possible. When they worked apart, they checked in without words, watching from a distance to be sure the other was safe. There were moments of doubt. On long evenings when the wind howled and the house creaked, she wondered if she had made the right choice. She missed the sound of other people, the simple comfort of knowing help was nearby. Loneliness could rise suddenly, without warning. He felt it too, though differently. He had chosen isolation long ago, believing it easier than loss. Now, with another person sharing his days, he felt a strange fear. He had something to protect, something to lose. One afternoon, a storm came faster than expected. The sky darkened suddenly and the wind picked up hard. They moved quickly, securing what they could. Rain came heavy, turning the ground slick. At one point she slipped and fell hard. He reached her in seconds, lifting her carefully, checking for injury. She was shaken but unhurt. He did not let go right away. That night they sat closer to the fire than usual. The storm passed slowly, leaving the land soaked and quiet. Neither spoke for a long time. Words felt unnecessary and perhaps too fragile. As weeks passed, trust deepened. It showed in simple ways. She began to speak more freely, offering thoughts and ideas without fear of being dismissed. He listened. Sometimes he agreed, sometimes not, but he always considered her words. That alone meant more to her than she could express. He began to change as well. He laughed once, unexpectedly, at something small she said. The sound surprised them both. He seemed almost embarrassed, but she smiled, and the moment stayed between them like a shared secret. Winter came hard and early. Snow covered the land, changing everything. Tasks became slower, more dangerous. Supplies had to be watched closely. They planned carefully, counting what they had and what they could spare. During the coldest days, they stayed indoors more. The house felt smaller then, but also safer. She told him stories from her past, not all at once, but in pieces. About her childhood, her hopes, and the promise that had once been made to her and broken. She spoke without anger, only honesty. He listened quietly. When she finished, he said only, "I'm glad you're here." It was a simple sentence, but it stayed with her. One night she fell ill. It began with exhaustion and grew into fever. He noticed at once. He tended to her carefully, doing everything he could. He stayed awake through the night, changing cloths, checking her breathing, watching her face as if afraid it might disappear. She recovered slowly. When she was strong enough to sit up, she saw how tired he looked. Something shifted then. She realized how deeply he cared, even if he did not speak of it. When spring finally returned, the land seemed to breathe again. Grass pushed through the soil. The air softened. Work increased, but so did hope. They planted, repaired, and prepared for the months ahead. The town was not forgotten. Once they traveled back to trade for supplies. People noticed them. Not just that they were together, but how they moved as one, quietly connected. Some were surprised, others were curious. She felt different there now, stronger, more sure of herself. She no longer felt like the woman left behind. She was someone who had built something real. When they returned to the homestead, the sun was setting. The land stretched wide before them, familiar and demanding. She looked at it with a steady heart. This life was still hard. Nothing about it had softened, but within that hardness something gentle had grown, something lasting. And though neither spoke of love, it was present in every shared task, every quiet glance, every moment they chose to face the day together. Spring did not arrive gently. It came with wind that pulled at clothes and rain that soaked the ground until boots sank deep with every step. But after the long winter, even the struggle felt like a gift. The land opened again, and with it came more work than they could count. They began each day before sunrise. He handled the heavier labor, repairing fences damaged by snow and time, checking the animals and preparing the fields. She worked beside him when she could and on her own when needed. She planted a small garden near the house, choosing carefully what would grow best in the rough soil. Each seed felt like a promise placed into the ground. There were failures. Some plants did not survive. Some days ended with more exhaustion than progress. But she did not give up. She studied the land, watched how water moved, how the sun touched different areas. Slowly, the garden began to take shape. He noticed her determination. She did not ask for praise, but he gave it quietly when it was earned. A nod. A short word of approval. Those small signs meant more than long speeches ever could. As weeks passed, the homestead began to look different. Not easier, but more alive. The fence lines held. The house stayed cleaner. The land showed signs of care rather than simple use. He felt something unfamiliar growing inside him, pride not just in his work, but in what they were building together. She, too, was changing. Her posture straightened. Her voice grew steadier. She no longer questioned every choice she made. When problems came, she faced them without shrinking back. The woman who had once stood quietly at the back of a room now stood firmly in her place. Trouble came without warning, as it often did on the frontier. One morning, he returned from checking the far edge of the land with worry written across his face. Several animals were missing. Tracks showed they had been frightened off during the night. Losing them would mean losing months of effort and security. They did not panic. Instead, they planned. She suggested checking the low valley where water collected, remembering how animals sought shelter there during storms. He considered it, then agreed. They searched for hours under the hot sun. Just as hope began to fade, they heard movement. The animals were there, unsettled but alive. Relief washed over them both. In that moment, he looked at her with open respect. "You were right," he said simply. The words mattered. He had trusted her judgment, and it had saved them. That evening, they sat together longer than usual, sharing a quiet meal. The air felt lighter. He spoke more freely, telling her pieces of his own past, about how he had come west alone, about loss he rarely named, about why he had chosen distance over connection. She listened without interruption. When he finished, she did not try to fix anything. She only said, "You don't have to carry it alone anymore." He did not answer, but something eased in his chest. Summer brought heat that pressed down heavy and unrelenting. Work became slower, more careful. They rested when they could, drank water sparingly, and watched for signs of danger. The land demanded attention, but it also rewarded patience. The garden produced more than expected. Fresh food changed everything. Meals felt fuller. Energy returned more quickly. She took quiet pride in this success, knowing it came from effort and learning, not luck. Once, during a trip to town for supplies, they overheard people talking about them, not with pity or doubt, but with curiosity. Some spoke of how well the homestead was doing. Others mentioned how different he seemed now, less closed, less harsh. She felt a strange satisfaction, not because of recognition, but because it proved something she had always believed. People were not fixed. Life could change if given care and time. On the way back, the wagon wheel cracked badly. They were far from help. The sun was setting and the road ahead was rough. Without hesitation, they worked together. She held tools steady while he repaired what he could. When darkness fell, they lit a small lantern and continued. It took hours. Their hands were sore, their patience tested, but they did not argue, they did not blame. They simply kept going. When the wheel finally held, they sat back in silence, exhausted but steady. "I couldn't have done this alone," he said. She looked at him. "Neither could I." Autumn arrived quietly, with cooler nights and softer light. It was a season of preparation and reflection. They stored what they could, repaired what needed fixing, and planned for the cold months ahead. Their bond had deepened into something unspoken but strong. They moved easily around each other now, understanding moods and needs without explanation. Trust had replaced uncertainty. One evening, as they stood watching the sky darken, he spoke again, his voice low and sure. "I chose you because I needed help," he said, "but you gave me more than that." She waited. "You gave this place a heart." She felt emotion rise but kept her voice steady. "You gave me a life." They stood together as the stars appeared, one by one. Hardship had not left them, it never would, but it no longer defined them. They had learned to face it together, to lean instead of withdraw, to build instead of endure. The frontier remained unforgiving. Yet within its wide silence, they had created something rare, a shared life shaped by respect, patience, and quiet strength. And though the hardest days were still ahead, they now faced them not as strangers bound by necessity, but as partners who had chosen, again and again, to stay. Years passed in a way that felt both slow and sudden. Days were still filled with work, but the work no longer felt heavy in the same way. It had meaning now. Each repaired fence, each planted seed, each careful plan for winter carried the weight of experience and shared effort. The land changed with time, and so did they. What once looked empty now showed signs of care everywhere. Paths were worn smooth by use. The house stood stronger, protected against weather and years. The garden grew larger, shaped by lessons learned season after season. Nothing about the frontier had softened, but they had learned how to live within it. She had become known beyond the homestead. When people spoke of her, they no longer used quiet pity or surprise. They spoke of her strength, her sense, and her steady presence. Women in town asked her advice. Men nodded with respect. She carried herself differently now, not because others noticed her, but because she finally saw her own worth. He had changed too, in ways that were impossible to miss. The sharp edge he once carried had dulled, replaced by calm confidence. He spoke more, listened better, and no longer kept himself distant from the world. He was still quiet by nature, still shaped by hard years, but warmth lived beneath the surface now. They did not speak often about what they had become to each other. Words felt unnecessary. Their bond showed itself in the way they moved together, in shared glances, in the ease of working side by side. What they had built did not need explanation. One autumn morning they stood in the field watching the sun rise. Mist clung low to the ground, softening the land. She breathed in the cool air and felt a deep sense of peace. "I used to think my life was over," she said quietly, "back when no one wanted me." He looked at her then, truly looked at her, as if the idea itself surprised him. "They didn't see you," he said. She smiled. "Neither did I." That understanding stayed with them. Life had not handed them happiness. They had shaped it slowly and carefully through choice and effort. As time moved on, new responsibilities came. Children arrived, bringing noise and warmth into the house. The days grew louder, messier, and fuller. Sleep became rare, patience more important than ever. But even in exhaustion, joy found its way in. She guided them with firmness and kindness, teaching them respect for the land and for each other. He taught them skills, showing by example rather than words. Together, they passed on what the frontier had taught them: resilience, honesty, and the value of standing by one another. The town watched with quiet admiration. The bride no one wanted had become the center of a strong family. The cowboy who once lived alone had created a home filled with life. Hard years still came. Crops failed sometimes. Storms damaged what they had worked so hard to build. Loss visited as it always does. But they faced it with steady hearts, knowing they were not alone. On quieter evenings, when the house finally rested, they would sit together and watch the land stretch endlessly before them. The same land that had once seemed so unforgiving now felt familiar, almost kind. "I wouldn't change it," she said once. "Neither would I," he replied. Their story was never loud. There were no great celebrations or dramatic moments that would be written down for others to remember. But in the quiet strength of their life, something powerful existed. They had proven that worth is not decided by first impressions. That love can grow from respect and shared struggle. That even in the harshest places, life can be transformed by patience and choice. And long after the dust settled each day, after the sun dipped below the wide horizon, what remained was simple and true. Two people who found each other when neither expected it. A life built where none seemed possible, and a harsh frontier made gentler, not by the land changing, but by the hearts living upon it.